Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. Our topic this evening is biofeedback, brainwave synchronization, and telepathy. And my guest, Dr. Jean Millay, is both a biofeedback researcher and a parapsychologist. Welcome, Jean. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm happy to be here.
You're an unusual person. You've combined many talents, Jean. You're really one of the most unique individuals I know, in that you're both a scientist in conventional biofeedback research and in parapsychology, and you have some psychic gifts yourself as a trance medium. I might also mention that you are the director of biofeedback at the Center for Creative Aging in Santa Rosa, California. And you started your career as a filmmaker and as a school teacher, so you've gone through quite an odyssey.
Well, yes. Actually, I started as an artist, and I did murals all over San Francisco back in the 50s. And we did silkscreen process and designed wallpaper and carpets and fabrics and so on. And somewhere along the line, I did this movie. And the movie won the Film as Art Award in 1965, so that's 20 years ago. And then I became a school teacher to teach art, and I became very discouraged with teaching situations at that time, and I wanted to, actually I wanted to make films that would help students learn. And of course now what we're doing is, with Aware Teaching Systems, is creating educational programs with a computer, with animation and cartoons and creative processes and so on. So all through that.
I didn't even mention your career as a computer graphic artist.
Well, it's funny, you know, there's not that much funding, of course, in parapsychology, and so you get interested in a subject and you follow it until then you have to do something else.
Well, you certainly have many talents. Tonight I'd like to focus in on the very special and sensitive issue of brainwave synchronization, and it's an area in which you are one of the experts, and in particular the relationship between brainwave synchronization and telepathy.
Well, I became interested, I used to sort of hang out at the Dream Laboratory, you know, where Dr. Stanley Krippner was looking at telepathy and in dreams. And
this is in Brooklyn, New York, Maimonides Hospital.
1970, I think. And I had been a subject for Dr. Barbara Brown's experiments in brainwave, see if you could voluntarily control your brainwaves in those times. And somehow we decided, after trying to create environments that would enhance telepathic communication, I began to think that perhaps it would be more useful if people could synchronize their brainwaves with each other. Now this didn't have a causal relationship. I mean, I spent a lot of years looking for a causal relationship, and I didn't really find one.
Between brainwave synchronization
between
and
two
telepathy.
people and their telepathic
Oh, synchronizing between you. You know, let me step back, because
Okay.
so much has happened. I remember 20 years ago, I was an undergraduate myself in college, and the notion that a human being could control their own brainwaves was really considered impossible. I mean, it was first mentioned with great shock and amazement back in the early 60s to me that there was...
Yes, that was about the time that Joe Camilla, bless him, started giving sound feedback to people and found out that they could control their EEG, and they were only looking at one channel at the time. But then I had designed this biofeedback light sculpture, which you'll see later on, and I was testing it out one day with the two different brainwave machines, and they had a warbling sound for the frequency. And when I was listening to the music, particularly Alaraka's tabla sound on the Indian music, I found that the sound of the drum was exactly the same frequency as the brainwaves on both hemispheres.
As the alpha brainwave.
As the alpha brainwave. And so I became very excited because it was a special state. It wasn't just alpha, where you have alpha on one side and something else on the other. This was a very special feeling. So I asked Tim Scully, who has Mendocino microcomputers, to design a machine that would confer that
The
synchronization.
synchronization between the
two
hemispheres
right.
of the brain, because for our listeners
Right.
who may not know, the brain is almost two organs in a sense, one on this side and one on the other side.
There's a lot of duplication, but there are some specialties, and you know, maybe the brainwave follows the blood flow, but you have different centers for seeing and hearing and speaking and so on, and they change in their frequency. So Tim designed the first phase comparator and gave it to me to do my research when I was working on a PhD.
Yes.
So we spent a lot of time first training people to synchronize the EEG between right and left to see if it was useful. I mean, maybe they wouldn't like it.
Now, if let me try and understand this. If I were, say, drumming with one hand, and in the other hand, if they're synchronous, then they're both going like that together.
Together, right.
And otherwise, they're going not together.
Different. Well, it's hard to, I mean, mechanically, that would be a description of synchronization of the brain waves.
Yes.
But when there's a lot of ways that we have of focusing attention. We focus our eyes open. We focus like when we're talking right now. We focus when you close your eyes and visualize, or you focus your mind in the center of your head when you're trying to meditate or whatever, turn off thought. It turns out that everybody has a certain amount of their, say, alpha rhythm, which we were looking at that time, that's in, and that, for instance, if yours is 30% and somebody else is 60%, just doing ordinary thought, or your eyes closed and running your pictures or whatever.
And the alpha rhythm seems to be very interesting for some reason.
Well, they all are,
All
actually. In those days, there was a lot of interest in meditation and alpha, and since we found other things going on. But at that time, what happens is that when you try to increase what your normal alpha frequency is, and to increase that synchronization, you have to stop thinking. And whenever you went back to wondering, you know, analyzing what you were doing, well, then the tone would stop. And so you'd have, with the phase comparator, you'd have a tone feedback, and it would have an immediate feedback for your meditation. Say when your mind is wandering, you know, that tone would turn off. So what we found is that people could increase the synchronization by the feedback, and that when it's a little more technical, when the ratio of what's simultaneous alpha and what's in phase increased, there would be invariably this, oh, you know, the aha experience, or I just remembered something, or now I have the answer to this problem.
In other words, you've got computers that are doing some very sophisticated analyses
very
that
sophisticated.
probably our viewers don't need to know all the technical details about, but you were able to correlate a very particular kind of synchronization between the two hemispheres of the brainwave with this aha state.
Yes. Yes, this has been a very interesting process, and it doesn't need to be an alpha. Some people would synchronize best if they're focusing on something in a faster frequency. That you have your own, your brainwave is like your own personal handwriting, and so your own brainwave, whatever's normal for you, is what you enhance.
Well, so we're looking at several dimensions. One is the frequency, or how fast the brain is in effect vibrating electromagnetically, and the other is the two hemispheres, whether or not they're working in synchrony with each other.
Exactly. Both hemispheres cooperate a lot, but it seems that when they synchronize in phase, then the nonverbal parts and the verbal parts can talk to each other, and you have the aha.
That's when you feel really together, I suppose.
Yes, getting yourself together, right?
And then you went on to design the biofeedback light sculpture, I presume.
Yes. Well, I had the light sculpture before I discovered synchronization. The light sculpture was an art project, and we were looking at it as a way of getting people, or perhaps in the same state, to improve their telepathic communication. What came out of that was this interhemispheric synchronization, which turns out to enhance a person's ability to focus attention in any form. And of course, you know me, I feel that if you can increase your ability to focus attention, you can increase your intelligence.
Isn't that interesting? And we'll get into that some more. Let's take a look at the biofeedback light sculpture. We'll see it in just a few seconds, I think.
Okay. Well, this is 8 layers of plexiglass, and it lights up on the end. The picture shows me all hooked up there with all the electrodes. It's not a very glamorous hairdo, I'm afraid.
We'll forgive you for that.
Oh, thanks.
But you can see some lights in that box that you were looking at.
And with my eyes closed, I'm attempting to go into alpha. Now, would be the alpha pattern, the blue pattern that's holding right there. Now, I'm also doing other things to show the flickering process. The green pattern is your faster frequencies, your beta. And if you have, say, green on one side and blue on the other sometime, right now it's holding. You see the green coming in. It's like you're thinking on one side, like, what am I doing now? And that will cut in.
And each side of the picture is a different part of your...
It's a different hemisphere.
Uh-huh.
So the ones with a half a pattern on your right side represents the right hemisphere, and the ones with a half a pattern on the left side represent your left hemisphere. So that's how it works.
A very unique form of biofeedback.
It was a lot of fun. Actually, you need the sound is better for synchronizing in alpha because the lights tend to, you do alpha with your eyes closed more and the lights tend to block that. But it was wonderful as a demonstration to people that their mind is really a light energy form. Now, physicist, Nobel Prize winner Steve Weinberg said that electromagnetism was a warble on the fifth dimension. And since you can control with your mind the fifth dimensional aspects of your manifest physical body, that means the mind has to be on a higher dimension.
Well, this is getting very interesting now, but I want to come back to a point you made earlier, which seems to me absolutely crucial, Jean, and that is that if you can learn how to focus, what did you say?
Well, if you can increase your ability to focus attention, then you can increase the amount of intelligent information that comes in. And so I said it more precisely, you can increase your intelligence. But my feeling is that a lot of children in school, and of course this goes for adults too, that your mind starts to wander. And I have had students who are just, every distraction takes them off. Of course, every distraction is a shift in their EEG too, because the other side of that is that every time you shift your focus of attention, your electrical field shifts, and that's measurable on the EEG machine. So if you can avoid shifting it, you learn then to steady and to bring your mind into steady focus. Now that translates into other fields. Goes from meditation, you can translate that into the things you need to learn, the things you need to read, the things whatever it is that you want to focus on.
I recall hearing you say once that if you can learn to focus your mind, you can learn any skill whatsoever.
Well, I would still agree with that to some extent, but I don't think I'm ever going to be a musician. I just don't. I didn't focus on it soon enough, and I'm not particularly interested in becoming a mathematician at this point. I think that if my life depended on it, I could probably, dig in and do it. I did dig in and learn something about the computer.
Well, it may be a question of practicing what you preach to a certain extent, but in principle, if you did focus, you might.
I think so. I think it's possible. I've never said, well, there's this I can't do,
The whole point is many times we think that certain things are impossible for us. 20 years ago, it was considered impossible to control your internal your heartbeat. It was considered impossible to control your body temperature, your brainwaves. Now it's commonplace.
Yes, that's of course the essence of biofeedback use in medicine, which is very commonly used at this point. And certainly, for instance, even the galvanic skin response machine registers the amount of sweat on your fingers, and so when you get emotional, you get a response on that electrically. And we're currently developing a computer program for the IBM, which is involving the biofeedback with the GSR. And again, it has to do with focusing attention. You get in a highly emotional state, and focusing your mind is what brings calmness back into your body.
I suppose part of mental focus is the ability to realize that it's not so much that you control these things, but you can even sense them. We used to think that everything inside the body you never felt, anyway. It was sort of an invisible part of yourself, the biological unconscious. And now, if you can control your brainwaves, why, certainly you can feel them, you can perceive them, can't you?
You can perceive them. There's a study that was published about how a person could have conscious control of a single neuron.
A single neuron.
If you can get fed back information from it, you can get it. But on another level, and this is one of the other things that we look at the Center for Creative Aging, is that you can get a person to focus. For instance, if you had a sore shoulder, and I would say, okay, focus your whole energy into that shoulder, you can start to see things that's going on there. You'll have both the emotional connection. You'll say, oh yes, I was really angry when I tripped over that something, and then you start working with those emotions as pure light, because all of our emotions are measured electromagnetically, so we might as well think of them as light. Instead of identifying with the anger, you just identify with the power of it. And it becomes very synergistic. You release the emotional tension in that place, and then medically you'll have a better sense of what to do about it.
It's as if in meditation on pain, all of a sudden the pain loses the quality of pain and just becomes another sensation.
Right, another sensation.
Well, you began looking at these very subtle forms of sensation, perception, and from there you moved into telepathy research, didn't you?
Well, yes. I'd had so many experiences, and there are members of my family that sort of thought I was really flipping out, you know. And so I kind of had to know for myself what's going on. When my grandfather died and I felt that he came to tell me, was that really happening? You know, what was happening? How did I know that? And I put through a phone call, and my mother was there at the hospital, and she said, how did you know to call just now? Well, I couldn't tell her. Grandpa told me. I mean, back in the 50s, there just wasn't a way, we didn't have a language for that sort of thing. So I've had to pursue this really as much as a hobby as in research, and we've done a number of telepathic, very accurate kinds of image communication over the years. And in my class, I was teaching parapsychology for a while, I found this very talented young man who just drew pictures all through class. He didn't take notes. His name is Jim Dallin. He's now a very famous computer artist. But in those days, we decided to do some telepathic work with him. And I wasn't interested in those days particularly in statistics, because you have just a simple little sketch and you get a simple sketch. I wanted to know, like, what does he see when he closes his eyes? And so I would ask him to do that. I'd say, okay, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just draw anything you see and I'll be someplace and see if you can pick it up. Well, he would pick up things from many dimensions. He would pick up precisely the things I was looking at. He would pick up things out of my mind, out of my past. I was very emotionally disturbed one day, and he picked up the whole dynamic of that disturbance and things going on in my family. And one time, and this is harder for people to believe, and it certainly didn't handle the statistics of that particular experiment, but he drew a picture of a table, and there was a letter on it. He said, the letter is opened and on the floor, and it's important. And everything else he had done was so accurate that when I got home, I looked for a letter that was on the floor and was opened, and there was only one under my desk. And it was an invitation, well, it was a discussion about a parapsychology conference going on in Brazil. And I couldn't afford to go, and it was too late to send a paper, and I had ignored it, and it had somehow fallen on the floor. Well, instead, I answered the letter because he had drawn that. And the following year, after I'd moved, and I'd moved several times during the period of my dissertation, you know how economics are, and so there was no way that that letter could have been forwarded to me. But because I had answered it in that particular location, the following year I got a telegram and inviting me to go to Brazil.
I see. So he's been an important person in
Oh,
your
yes,
life.
very much so. And so where do you put that sort of thing when you're just looking for, okay, what am I sending now? I didn't have anything to do with that.
Well, and you brought with you some of these drawings that
Yes.
he has created in some of your experiments with him, which we can look at presently.
Oh, good. Why don't we do that?
In fact, could you describe
Okay.
some of the research you did with him?
Well, his studio is in Santa Rosa, just between Santa Rosa and Cotati. And we had some other person showing the, picked locations and put them in sealed envelopes. So we had no idea what these locations were. Then they were kept by a third person, and we would go over there and throw dice and get the number of the of the location, and then we'd go there, and there were usually places in Petaluma, which is about 10 or so miles away. And so Jim would start drawing at a certain time, and he'd write the times down. And so if something like some emergency happened or something like that, he would have those
He'd
changes.
pick on things that were not part of the intended target.
Right. If we were late getting there, he would get something
But
that
some
happened
of his
along the way.
were really right on.
Very, would you say non-random?
Perhaps we could see the first picture now.
Oh,
when
good.
We'll talk about that one.
All right. The first one was, there was a file cabinet on a rickety table. Now, that's not a very interesting target, as a matter of fact. But as you can see in the picture now, he drew a file cabinet on a rickety table. It's a little more elaborate. He calls them medical files. I don't know that it was medical files in the file cabinet. He wasn't that specific. But, you know, that's really quite unusual. It isn't something if you're going through saying, you know, judging, is this right or not? I mean, it's right there. It's right on it.
I should think that as a scientist, it's these kinds of dramatic hits that let you know that you've got a real phenomenon there, even though it's hard to find statistically at times. It must be like Madame Curie trying to find a gram of pure radium by going through a ton of pitch blend.
It's kind of like that. If you only get one like this out of 100 that are wrong, you know that it's, at least it took place on that occasion.
Yeah.
And then there's another one time when we asked him to judge the, to pick who was going to be the World Series. Now, we had done a whole series of precognition experiments for a person who was interested in these things, and I don't know baseball very much, and so I chose psychics who don't know baseball very much.
This was 1982.
1982, yes. And the person...
I wonder if we can see that image that he drew now.
Oh, good. This one was, he chose the Cardinals to win the World Series at that time, even though the Cardinals hadn't won the pennant
And he
yet.
chose it by way of a drawing.
Well, he just started drawing those two birds on a baseball bat. And then he said he doesn't know what he's going to draw. He just starts drawing,
It
and
just
the
came
image
out.
comes out of it. And then we had it notarized, so there's the notary stamp on there to show that before they had before the World Series, and they had won the game. Now
This is before the Cardinals had even won the pennant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So there was. Wasn't 1 and 2. It was, you know, 1 out of well, just a no. That whole experiment, actually, we came out about 10% of a chance, but we had to stop the experiment because there was one on the baseball games and the other one was on the football games. And so what I did was to put people in hypnosis. People knew nothing about ball games, sort of create the environment of the ball game and ask them to look at the scoreboard, and then and see what we got. Of course, the funder of this experiment was also looking at all the computer programs and that they have. And one person said, "Well, there's nothing on the scoreboard. The scoreboard's nothing but cobwebs on the scoreboard." So I stopped the experiment because there wasn't going to be a ball game that day. And it turns out then that was when they had a football strike, and there weren't any ball games for the rest of the season.
Fascinating.
So we didn't finish.
And then you did some other, more like happenings than experiments, international global meditations involving ESP.
Well, yes, I was particularly interested. I got invited, because of the light sculpture, I got invited to the Congress of Sorcery in South America. And it was happening at the same time as the Association for Humanistic Psychology meeting in Estes Park, Colorado. So I said, great, we'll get groups of people to meditate on a mountaintop. I mean, the earth vibrates in brainwave frequency, and my idea was we were going to tune into that and try to have the people in Estes Park, Colorado, throw the I Ching as the randomly selected message and send it to, well, Uri Geller was going to be in South America at that time. Well,
perhaps we can see the third image now.
Okay, this was nothing that we planned happened.
Everything came out wrong.
Yes.
But it still worked.
Well, but we had Jim Dallin drawing in
The artist,
California. He had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning because we were all going to be on the mountaintop at sunrises, you know, on our
And
sunrise.
you were in South America?
I was in South America.
Yeah.
I was in Bogota. Now, what happened was that Uri Geller was surrounded by bodyguards, and the energies were so heavy that both of us felt that wouldn't be good for clearing the focus needed for telepathy.
So what do we have here?
So this is on the right is the medicine man, Seo Kukui, who came barefoot to Bogota. He'd been invited there as a very powerful shaman to give the opening ceremonies for the Congress of Sorcery. So I asked him through translators if he would conduct our meditation, and he said that he'd had visions that we were coming to open new channels of communication, and he would be very glad to do this. Of course, that thrilled me. And his idea was to go up to Lake Guadavita and hold the ceremonies there.
Yeah.
So we did that, and the other drawing that was right next to Sekoki was Jim Dallon's response to it in California. Had no idea.
It certainly looked like a South American shaman, too.
Well, yes, it was with the hats. Of course, Dallon usually draws things a little more elaborate. And he also had drawn the I Ching coins. He didn't know that those were going to be used in Colorado.
Jean, we've been covering a lot of ground, and I think what we want to do is begin to tie all of this back together now, because we've got viewers out there who are probably having their minds blown a little bit by the range of topics and how extraordinary some of these experiences are. How can we tie it all together? Is it the case that when you're more sensitive to these internal perceptions, these subtle brainwave states and the like, that people seem to actually also exhibit telepathy?
Well, I can't say that now. I mean, you know, after 15 years of study, I know less than I used to. We found that the people who synchronize best with each other are also the best at telepathy, but during telepathy, when we finally got the chart recorders and everything else at Langley Porter, something else was happening. So we had to rethink the whole thing. I feel that there is a resonance, and yes, when you go up on the mountaintop away from a lot of other electromagnetic pollution, there is a resonance with you and the earth, and the earth may very well be conscious, as the shamans think that is. It's in the lower alpha upper theta rhythm, 7.8 cycles per second.
And people can resonate with the whole planet.
Yes, exactly. So the idea of the morphogenic field, you get a lot of people resonating and loving the earth. Who knows? Maybe we could get a peaceful place happening.
So perhaps that's really the message that you might have for some of our listeners, is to just kind of tune into the environment, into your body, and into the psychic levels at the same time, if that's what they'd like.
If that's what they'd like, yes. The tuning in is certainly healthy. Asking for images is another topic, and I think that could probably take a whole lot of time on another occasion. The images that come in, if the mind is on a higher dimension, as I mentioned before. So as it comes into the brain, then turns it into images and according to your memory and imagination.
Well, Jean, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. You've covered so many extraordinary things, and it's amazing to me how well you are able to synthesize these diverse areas, get right into the psychic, the telepathic, the shamanistic realm, and maintain your sense of balance, your sense of stability. You're always smiling whenever I see you.
Synchronization helps.
Yeah. So it's been a real joy.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's been fun to be here.
And thank you very much for being with us this evening as well.